As you know, we have had writers of talent that I admire. I don't do negative criticism. I do always positive criticism, and I always use writers in my course that, because of circumstances in their life, or their identity, or maybe even the law, they have to be challenged and come through that obstacle and come better on the other side. Demetria Martinez is that writer, who has been challenged by the law. We'll talk about that, and she'll tell us a little bit about that. But if you think of the writers, that we've had, beginning with Tomás Rivera, then Acosta, then Ron Arias, Reggie, and now Demetria, then you get a sense of why I chose these writers. And I'm just, as I said before, very pleased that they all said yes, to come to the class. This is a once-in-a-lifetime class for me and for you. And while we're in the moment here, this is for the future. And the interviews will be in the Chicano Studies Research Center, part of the archives there. And a little bit about, give you my 10 cents worth on mother tongue. It's to me, it's an amazing book in a variety of ways, because it's some of the themes that are current in our world today. So themes like war, torture, abuse, migration, the meeting of different peoples together, the crossing borders, as this book does, from Chicana, Mexicana, Mexican America, and Nueva Mexicana to the other side, to Central America. When you put all these pieces in the book, then you see how much Demetria Martinez does with a story that takes place in one particular, we'll talk about that too, that takes place in Old Town, New Mexico. But it radiates outward from Old Town and from Albuquerque to all of us. And it's a moment in the tradition, when we started with Rivera, that writers then are beginning to move on beyond the first phase of the Chicana and Chicano movement into new themes, new topics that are going to be incorporated into the literature. And in Demetria Martinez, then we have that writer, because, as I said, of circumstances, and choice of being part of the sanctuary movement and the circumstances that happened with the U.S. government, and has also something to say outside of the book about her life, and then also within the book. She was telling me yesterday it took some time to gain her voice after what had happened, and to begin to write mother tongue. So I'd like to welcome Demetria Martinez. Would you like to say a few words and then into the class before we get started?
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Okay. So I'll do some images, and then I'll ask you, and then we can talk a little bit about them. So if you allow me, yes, Peyton did very well in the Central American context. Now I'll give you the New Mexican context, and as I said, it's a very specific historical and cultural site, and we'll talk about that too in the class. So we can start with the images. Oh, there it is. Maybe. Can all of you see? Yes, okay. This is the Zia sun symbol, and it's the flag of New Mexico. We have the Bear Republic. New Mexico has the sun symbol, the Zia sun symbol. Going back to before, to the original nations, the First Nations in New Mexico. Next. And this is the Pueblo of Zia. This is the Pueblo that has given us this symbol of the sun, and it's just north of Albuquerque, New Mexico. This Pueblo Zia. Next. And these are images of early photographs that we have of the late 19th century, early 20th century. The images of the First Nations in New Mexico. and these are called the Pueblo Indians, so named by the Spaniards, Spanish-speaking people who came, because they lived in what looked like pueblos. Next. This is a ceremony. I think this is, late 19th century too. And it gives you a sense of, at least the landscape, of New Mexico. Demetria was saying it's quite green here compared to New Mexico. Next. This is Coronado. And Coronado was the first person from Europe after Cabeza de Vaca, who came into what is now today called El Norte, or the Southwest. Coronado took a trip from northern Mexico, and that's the coming in from Sonora up here, and this is Acoma, and this is Tiwa. This is what where that village of Zia sun symbol comes from. So the massacres begin with Coronado, and they continue with the next wave of conquerors. And whether we're pre-colonial or colonial or post-colonial, or pre-modern, modern, or post-modern, the massacres have continued. And if you've noticed the news about Guatemala, Rios Montt was convicted of indigenous genocide, and then the Supreme Court of Guatemala turned over the verdict. So those massacres are continuing today. They haven't gone away. Next. And this is just a depiction, different from the chronicles, in which the record shows how many were killed in this village. That is now the Zia reservation. Next. And this is the history of Demetria, which is also our history too. This is where it all began, in Mexico City in 1522. That's the first capital, call it, in North America, before Plymouth, before Jamestown. That's 1522 in what is now the Delegación de Coyoacán in Mexico City. We'll return to that beginning with our next writer, Lucha Corpi. In that novel, Black Widow's Wardrobe, we end up in Coyoacán, that place of 1522, when Doña Marina lived in this area, and we'll get to that character. But if you see, then this became the Royal Highway, El Camino Real, that went from Mexico up to Santa Fe. Santa Fe is the capital of New Mexico, and this is El Paso del Norte. As John Ritchie wrote his first sketch essay in 1958, it was about El Paso del Norte, and it's always been known that way. Now understand too that this is not a discovery or anything like that by those who came, because these are native trails, indigenous trails that have been used before. And that area that we now call the Southwest, the stability of those groups were made possible by the arrival of corn that came from central Mexico about 1500 BC. So there have been trade routes between this area and the central area of Mexico. It's in Mexico City, that area, that is today, that the corn was first cultivated from a grass. It wasn't corn, and cultivated to become corn. Unlike wheat and rice, which is exactly how it is in nature, in the Central Valley of Mexico, that had to be developed into corn from a grass. And these then are the places that in the history of New Mexico, El Paso del Norte was established by the next fellow that we're going to talk about. And then it was Chihuahua, which this became the Chihuahua Trail. And then the settlers of New Mexico, not with the East, but came down to Chihuahua to trade with Chihuahua and take into the other area, or further south into Durango. But the beginning of all that is in Zacatecas. So if there's anyone from here from Zacatecas, Sombrerete, Fresnillo, Plateros, Chalchihuites, these are the small towns that gave the people that went up north. Not Spaniards. mestizos already, from this particular area of Zacatecas. Next. So this is the area, and reading some of Demetria's work, her essays, she has family that came from Sombrerete, right? I don't know, you want to say something about your family that came from this particular area?
My father's mother, Maria de Jesus, came from Mexico in the early part of the last century, whereas the rest of my family, our roots are in New Mexico. We've been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, and with our indigenous roots, we've been there since the beginning of time, according to those stories.
Yeah, so, Sombrerete is the place where the first tierra adentro settlements came from, on the other side into New Mexico. So this is important. These are still little towns today, but these are the places that gave the settlers up to New Mexico. Next. Yeah, there's Zacatecas, so you can see where it is in relation to us today. Thanks. There are more Zacatecanos in the United States than in Zacatecas. So it's a state that has given us much. And here's another Camino Real. Next. And this is the Camino Real. That was an actual road at one time. Not much is left of it. Washed away in many places, but there are still some of the stones that for the carriages that went up north to New Mexico. Next. This is Juan de Oñate, and this is sometimes it's known as the last conqueror, the last conquistador. He is the one who conquered New Mexico in 1598. And next. Yes, and this is that statue is in Hispaniola in New Mexico. The massacres continued with Juan de Oñate. An important historical event is Acoma. And if you ever go to New Mexico, Acoma is a mesa huge that just comes out of nowhere. It's called the Sky City. And in Acoma in 1599 was another massacre of indigenous populations there. In order to control the population, he ordered that all males, young males who could walk and work, have their right foot cut off, so that they wouldn't be able to be as physical as before. And in 1598, 400 years later, we're going to begin the celebrations of Juan de Oñate coming into New Mexico. And some quote-unquote vandals decided they were going to, about this, they sawed off his foot, as a payback for what had happened 400 years before. But they were called vandals, and before, these are in some ways those who had brought civilization and Christianity to this part of the world, right? And you know about this incident, right, of the vandals who cut off his. They put it back on. The authorities decided to put back on the leg. Anyway, no one knows who did it, but of course from the tribal council it was, we don't want to celebrate this. There's no reason for us to celebrate this. So next. I think this is at El Paso del Norte, in the El Paso in the airport. And he's the one who established El Paso del Norte as a city on the way to the north, to New Mexico. Yeah, next. Yeah, next. And these are always the kind of peaceful meetings that are depicted of the representation, of a Spaniard or a leader, of a group, and Native Americans, not showing what actually happened, with the meetings, as in Acoma, which is, as I said, another massacre, and all the women were enslaved and became servants in Acoma. The young men had their foot cut off, and the women became servants next. And this is pasó por aquí. This is famous in New Mexico, and this is Oñate, or someone in Oñate's troupe, decided to write this, pasó por aquí. And they tell me that this is authentic, that this is the actual moment of 1598, 1599. Next. And this is Diego de Vargas, who in 1698 began more settlements to come in from Zacatecas and northern Mexico, and this is in Santa Fe, New Mexico. If you go to Santa Fe or Albuquerque, the names of all these individuals are part of the landscape and part of the streets in these cities. Next. This is Zacatecas, the capital of Zacatecas. This is la ciudad de Zacatecas. And this is called La Fuente de los Conquistadores. You should know that after conquering Mexico City, and that being done with, the next area to be conquered was Zacatecas. Because of the silver mines of Zacatecas, it's well known about the mines in Zacatecas. Mining was one of the industries of that era, colonialism. And Cristobal de Oñate is the father of Juan de Oñate. And Cristobal de Oñate was one of the captains in the army of Cortés. So this is the next generation with Juan de Oñate that goes into New Mexico. So this is in La Ciudad de Zacatecas in Mexico. Next. So the names around the fountain are the names of the conquistadores, no? Yeah. Next. And this shows you Mexico at one time, before the United States took over Mexico in 1846, 1848, in that war between Mexico and the United States. That Mexico decided the United States decided that it wanted half of Mexico. There was war, battles in the United States, what we call today the United States, but you should know that we invaded Mexico with 2 armies from the north and 1 from the sea, from Veracruz and from the north, and the city of Mexico City was taken over by the U.S. forces. Next. And this is what it looked like at one time. There's California that goes all the way to New Mexico, and then New Mexico much larger than it is today, and then Texas on one side. And this is Nuevo Santander in this particular area here is the Rio Grande Valley. This is what gave us Tex-Mex culture. So it's not Texas itself, but further south. That gave us the lower Rio Grande Valley gave us the Tex-Mex culture, and the upper Rio Grande Valley gave us the New Mexican culture. Next. So this is then after the takeover, and there's the New Mexico Territory, which it was a territory, obviously a colonized area that's been taken over, and it's quite larger, as you see. It's composed of two states, New Mexico and Arizona, and it was a territory until 1912. So 1848, but not until 1912 that it became part of the Union in the sense of becoming a state. My friends from New Mexico, historians and also literary scholars, tell me that the reason that it didn't become a state right away like California and Texas is that it was too Mexican to become part of the United States. That there was not enough Easterners there to make it a state, whereas in California, probably more in San Francisco in that area, that there were enough Easterners to say, okay, it can become a state. Of course, Texas had already become independent in 1835. So these are the divisions that we have here between Arizona and New Mexico. So this is then now what we know as Arizona and New Mexico. Through the early 20th century, known as, I would say, Indian country, where a large number of reservations. And in 1888 was the final war between the U.S. government and the Apache Nation, that finally, the defeat of all the First Nations in the United States. This is Geronimo, this is Cochise, well known in the history of the Southwest, that final moment when it was over. Next. And this is Charles F. Loomis. Charles F. Loomis is an Easterner from Massachusetts who came out to California and to the Southwest. In 1884, he became the first editor of the Los Angeles Times, a man of talent, being here at the beginning of Los Angeles. And he writes that Los Angeles was a Mexican town. Of course, it had to be. It couldn't be anything else, at that moment. But you see, he has put on the garb of someone from the Southwest. He wasn't from the Southwest. He was from the East. And before he died in 1927, he published a book, and he said, I was the one who named this area the Southwest. So before that, it was known El Norte de Mexico, or the territories that had been conquered. But he began writing in 1891 about the Southwest, so that he became the authority about the Southwest, who we are today. I don't think we'll ever lose this Southwest, but we owe it to him, for naming this particular area. And if you go up the Pasadena Freeway, you will see the Southwest Museum and his home that is there. He made his home here in Los Angeles, and the Autry Museum and the Southwest Museum have merged over by Griffith Park. And this man then, in a sense, what happens after military conquest is the cultural conquest, and to rename a territory. And what I have read of Charles F. Loomis, he never once says, this is conquered Mexican territory. He says, this is Spain that became the United States. Yeah. And this is his book, The Spanish Pioneers, that gave us the idea of these people who came to bring God and civilization to the Southwest. Yeah. And these are the first writers from New Mexico, and Demetria knows about the New Mexican literary tradition. Unlike us, that we don't have a literary tradition. In New Mexico, there is one that began in the 20th century. Hotel de War, writing about her Hispano culture and responding to people like Charles F. Loomis, known as the Hispanos. 1936 is her first book, Old Spain and Our Southwest, and it tells you something about that moment, Old Spain and Our Southwest. And next. So that's her book, Old Spain and Our Southwest, by Nina Otero de Warren. Next. And this is another writer, Cleofas Martinez Jaramillo. You should know that in the areas like the South Rio Grande area and the North Rio Arriba of New Mexico, that are names because of the settlers, that are names that are repeated over and over again. So Chavez, Gonzalez, Anaya, Jaramillo, and then another name that's part of that area is Martinez. And Demetria comes from the Martinez family, and she can tell you more about the farm where she grew up. This is then Cleofas Martinez de Jaramillo, married a man named Jaramillo. Next. And this Fabiola Cabeza de Vaca, we fed them cactus. So there is writing before the Chicano movement. Next. And this is Fabiola Cabeza de Vaca there. Next. This is La Conquistadora. This is La Virgen de los Remedios, and she came with Cortés to the Americas. Hidalgo, the father of Mexican independence, had a choice of what to use as his banner in the Wars of Independence. He chose La Virgen de Guadalupe, and the government chose La Virgen de los Remedios, or also known as La Conquistadora. Next. And this is La Virgen de Guadalupe in Santa Fe. And the two endpoints, Mexico City and Santa Fe, have these shrines to the Virgen de Guadalupe. And it tells us about northern mestizo culture, a mixture of certainly Spanish, but more indigenous, and a variety of other things. The crypto Jews, who came also to New Mexico, so Jewish culture also in New Mexico. Next. And this is La Virgen de Guadalupe. And Maria, in mother tongue, has statues of La Virgen de Guadalupe, about that's the image that she has in her home. No? And it tells us then about this northern Mexican mestizo culture. Next. This is in Santo Niño de Atocha, and Maria also has a statue of him, or an image of him. Santo Niño de Atocha obviously is from Spain, and brought to Zacatecas to be the patron saint of the miners, in Zacatecas. And then from there, went up into New Mexico. So if you go to Plateros, you will see El Santuario del Santo Niño de Atocha next. And this is the Santuario in Plateros next. And this is like Little Miracles Kept Promises, written by Sandra Cisneros, with all the little portraits, that one has there. This is all the same, completely covered, with these ex votos. Next. And then you have this, and this shows you the dramatic change that you have from the previous writers to this particular novel by Demetria Martinez. And what she writes about are these two individuals who fall in love with each other. One from El Salvador, the political refugee, and the other one, Mary Maria, from New Mexico, from Albuquerque. And the stark differences between the previous generation of writers versus the Chicano identity, that will be part of the new kind of writing that comes out of New Mexico. And Demetria says we needed to reimagine New Mexico. We needed to have characters that in some way reflected us. This is certainly the cover, but the inside has these characters. They're dark brown, as Maria describes Jose Luis, and they describe each other. So it's a radical difference from what came before. So understand that for me, then this is part of what I look at as I do my professor work and my writing work, is to see the radical changes from one moment in time to the next moment in time. And more so that this book is written and published in '94, of a time of 1982, but shoots us out into the future in 2002 as to what might be the future like, in 2002, with the child of the union of Nuevo Mexicana and this political refugee, Jose Luis. Next. And this is the book, and Demetria has referred to this book. This is the first cover of Bless Me Ultima, and then the indigenous look of Ultima, through there, and that is the book that kind of began the reimagining of New Mexico. I haven't seen the film. I don't want to see it. So this is what I like to think of as Bless Me Ultima. A curandera who's indigenous, who comes from long roots in New Mexico, from the Llano, a particular place, to connected in some way to Mexican traditions within New Mexico, and that's the way I want to think of Ultima. Next. This is another cover. Next. And that's Ria Naya. Demetria has, in her Confessions of Berlitz-Tape Chicana, she tells us a little bit about her arraignment, and that when she walked out of the courthouse, she said the first person she saw who was waiting for her was Rudy Anaya. And she says, I knew that I would have the support of New Mexicans in my case, that. So he's like the first, in a sense, writer. But if you think then of what he did and what is continuing with Demetria Martinez. Next. And there's Demetria.
When I was young.
You're still young. You're still young. Next. Yeah. See, you're still.
Oh, good. It's closer now.
Yeah. We met quite a while ago, huh? Yeah, quite a while ago. We were both shy. We didn't talk at all, I don't think, at that party in Albuquerque. Now I don't stop talking, she says. Next. This is a well-known collection of essays that, if you put them all together, are autobiographical. So if you want to know something about Demetria, and maybe read this along with mother tongue and compare Maria with Demetria in this collection, then you can do that. Next. And this is her latest book, The Block Captain's Daughter. All set in Albuquerque. So she's a writer of New Mexico, a writer of Albuquerque. That's where she situates her work. This is another, this is a book of poetry also. Yeah. This is the Rio Grande, that comes from Colorado and New Mexico and then comes down through the border, becomes the border between the United States and Mexico, and goes out into the Gulf of Mexico, in Brownsville, Matamoros, that area. But this is New Mexico. So New Mexico also has the Rio Grande, and it goes through the center, almost the center of Albuquerque. So next. So this is that's the center of Albuquerque, those buildings, and then the Rio Grande, that flows by it. And always a part of New Mexican writing, as it is a part of Texas writing, Texas Mexicano writing. Next. And this is the Sandia Mountains that are mentioned in the book. It's very local, very specific. And this is Albuquerque. Next. This is a festival that is in Albuquerque in the fall, in October. And that's the Rio Grande. Next. And this is the church that Maria goes to in the novel. And this is the area, the placita and the cantina, all that, where the story takes place, in New Mexico. So it's a very specific area that's touristy, because of people who come to buy, from the indigenous people who are selling their wares. And Maria comments on all that as she walks around, la placita. Next. But understanding that Maria, like Demetria, have been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. Understand that too. So this is, part of tourist New Mexico, I guess. Next. And this is the kiosk, the kiosco where they sit. The two lovers, in the book. So all these areas then are noted by Demetria and also by Maria, the character. Yes, next. And this is the night, the luminarias, that New Mexico is known for. Next. There's also shops. This is the, as I said before, if there's a place that's the center of New Age or Southwest chic, it's New Mexico and Albuquerque, and also Santa Fe. And Maria, Mary first, and then Maria, of course, is a New Age Latina. They're searching in some way, a cultural and spiritual search, for ways of dealing with what she's going through at the age of 19, who is an orphan, and has a godmother, and that's her world that she knows, and then she meets this fellow, Salvadoran refugee. And this is Mario Argueta. He's a well-known novelist and critic from El Salvador. And Mario Argueta, maybe we can begin with that after we finish the images, invited Demetria to come to El Salvador and to talk about her novel. And this, as I said, gives us the connections between Chicana, Mexicana Americana, Nuevo Mexicana, certainly part of the American literary canon too, and then also in some way participating in the dialogue with the novel of the Central American diaspora, and not just in Los Angeles, but in New York and in Europe, where Salvadorans are there. And the war is still in El Salvador, but the war is internal now. So writers are now writing about the internal war that they're going through, and Demetria Martinez participates in that, in 1994 through 2002. And Mario Argueta comments on the fact that she puts the end of her novel in 2002. So, let's see, these are some of the books by Mario Argueta. And then the words. want to read for you a citation by Manuel. Entonces, here it is, no? We can go with this. So, lengua madre se agrega, ¿no?, al acervo, gracias. Lengua madre se agrega al acervo bibliográfico sobre El Salvador. Temática, inspiración y visiones culturales de la escritora tienen como fuente experiencias de un hecho migratorio. La novela es eso, una historia de salvadoreños narrada en primera persona. Por consiguiente, forma parte de la memoria histórica. As I said, the novel is a personal and social memory, ¿no?, histórica nacional. Pienso que cuando se escriba sobre las expresiones culturales salvadoreñas, el movimiento santuario jugará un papel preponderante, ¿no?, para buscar las raíces, lo distinto que estamos siendo y seremos, ¿no?, en un plazo inmediato por este fenómeno que algunos críticos denominan desrealización, que revierte conceptos de identidad nacional. What will we be like, ¿no?, in the future, ¿no? La idea que subyace en la novela de esta novelista norteamericana es su encuentro con sus propias raíces chicanas a través de su experiencia salvadoreña. Demetria Martinez descubre el poder del idioma, ¿no?, como instrumento de lucha, rebeldía, integración y como autodescubrimiento. Sabemos lo que pasará culturalmente con los centroamericanos después de 3 o 5 generaciones, de una inmigración continua y ligada a una necesidad vital. Esto podría ser una reflexión que nos despierte la novela, ¿no?, Lengua Madre, ¿no? Entonces, this novel, ¿no?, that crosses borders, ¿no? So, thank you. Can we turn on the lights, and maybe you could tell us about going to El Salvador and meeting Manuel Argueta? Could we begin there? Yeah.
Well, I had never been to El Salvador. I only imagined it in order to write mother tongue. And I remember my first day in El Salvador, just coming out of the airplane and going to the place that we were staying and looking at the flowers and the trees and walking around. I knew that I had been here before. It was a really remarkable experience, and like I said, I could only have imagined it. It was very profound, and to meet someone like Manuel, who had dedicated his life to writing literature about the Salvadoran struggle, was a real inspiration, just a privilege.
And it was in the form of a conference, or?
Yeah, it was a conference on post-war testimonial literature.
And your book participates in the testimonial, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how you first saw it, when you wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
Let's back up a little bit. Tell us about the Martinez family, or the rancho, whatever, your roots then in New Mexico.
My father's people come from an area now known as Martineztown. It was originally a common land grant. Later, portions were sold off to different families, including my own. But we can trace our family's presence in Martineztown on my father's side for a number of generations. And our name used to be Martin, and I'm not sure how far back that was. And somehow it evolved into Martinez. And we think it's because all the people running around there, we were plural. There were so many of us that they used to refer to us as Los Martinez. And then the other theory is that no, great, whoever, Grandpa didn't want us to be mistaken for Martins, and so he changed it to Martinez. Anyway, that's my father's side of the family. My mother comes from an area, her people come from an area south of Albuquerque known as Tomé, Belén, Las Lunas, and they too, both sides of my family have been in New Mexico since time immemorial. By time immemorial, I say, when we were New Spain, Mexico territory, United States, and then as indigenous people according to the origin stories since the beginning of time. So that's what it's like to be a Chicana in New Mexico, is that sense of place, that sense of roots.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned Chicana, but you've also said, I'm Latina, I'm Nuevo Mexicana, and then I'll use in English, Mexican. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sometimes it depends on the audience I'm with. Sometimes if I say Chicana and they don't understand, sometimes it gets tiring to explain what it is. But it's the primary way that I identify myself. Chicana is a way, through the movimiento, that word became a way of honoring your indigenous roots and honoring the political element, the political struggle that came with the name Chicano-Chicana, that you are entering into this struggle for Chicano rights and the rights of indigenous people. When my mother, for example, was very young and they would ask her, what are you? She would say Spanish. And those were the days when you emphasized your European roots and stood away from your indigenous roots. So that's how I understand Chicana. Again, it's my primary self-reference. Hispano, Rudy Anaya refers to New Mexicans as Hispanos. Sometimes I'll use that name, but not really. Nuevo Mexicanas is a good name because it's very specific to an unusual place. And sometimes people will understand a lot right away with that description. The whole idea of old New Mexico families, the idea that we didn't cross the border crossed us. So it means a lot, I think. It signals a lot very quickly to people about what it means to be Latina from New Mexico. And Latina, it's a word I like too, because it kind of hooks me up with all these Latina, subgroups throughout the Americas. Salvadoran, Peruvian, Bolivian, whatever, we're all related. And so I like that kind of Pan-American aspect to it.
And Mexican sometimes?
Mexican, yeah, I like it too, because I like to shake people up. Sometimes I'll call myself, Mexican, Mexicana, and they'll look at me. So many people still see Mexicana, Mexicano as pejorative. And so I like to just say, I'm one of them. If you don't like them, well, I'm one of them. And I think that's important to keep getting that word, Mexicano, Mexicana, Mexican, out there in that way.
Santa Fe, Taos, Albuquerque, they're interesting cities because walking on the sidewalk, you can have these very different groups. You can have an Easterner, usually very wealthy because they can afford real estate. In New Mexico, you can have an Easterner. You can have someone who calls herself an Hispana or an Hispano. You can have someone who calls himself a Chicana or Chicano. And then you also have the First Nations, people who are there. There's no other place like it in California because here we're spread all over the place. There is no that kind of identity that you can see as you walk through the town. And for me, that was the most intriguing part of New Mexico, when you could see these different groups, there right before you. So the question was, how do you identify yourself in those places? And Mexican is still not necessarily a good term, because Mexican from Charles F. Loomis, who I showed you, when he first wrote about Mexicans, he says something like, they have a look of ineffable laziness, twice as dark as an Indian. Not even a coyote will eat the meat of a dead greaser because it's so spicy with the chili that they, eat. And so that was the beginning of the term greaser. As part of the Conquest, that you change Mexicans into greasers. And in New Mexico, in some families, the term was ceboso. That one over there is a ceboso, and I'm Spanish, and those were the distinctions that were drawn between. So even today, then, Mexican is not necessarily accepted. So
wetback.
yeah, wetback, that too, because there is immigration though into New Mexico, just like there is into California. Yeah. When did you decide to be a writer? How was it that it came to you that you wanted to write?
I loved to write when I was very young. I remembered yesterday rereading some of Mother Tongue that Maria used to write her way out of depressions. And I used to do that in high school, but I never thought, oh, someday I'm going to be a writer. I think it was in college when I was majoring in public and international affairs that I decided that my real love was poetry and that I needed to write poetry. And so I came home, moved to Old Town. I was really lucky. I actually had a house in Old Town, and started teaching myself to write poetry. And that's really how I got started.
And you write too that you didn't take any courses about novel writing. You had no idea about novel writing, and that wasn't of interest to you because you wanted to approach the writing of Mother Tongue as if it were poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell us a little bit about that too?
Yeah, a long poem. Yeah, should I talk about post-trial experience? Or do you want to do the trial?
No, that's fine. Okay, let's do that.
When my trial ended, I thought, oh good, back to normal. I'm going to write a manuscript of poetry. That's what I want to do. And I tried and nothing came forth. I was just stuck. It was a terrible, terrible feeling. And it was only years later that I figured out why that happened, the roots of that silence. One thing was that during my indictment, my attorney told me that the phone was probably tapped and that I should be careful what I say or go use another phone. I was told what I should and shouldn't say to the media. And when I was on the witness stand, I had to say things, and testifying on my own behalf, I had to say things knowing that anything I said could be used against me, refugees, or the movement. And so, after it was all over and I was found not guilty, I felt a kind of self-censorship set in, that there was a part of me that was still really unable to speak and explore political ideas through poetry. I talk about it as feeling that the government, the authorities, had cut out my tongue. It was really bad. In fact, I was rereading Mother Tongue, and Maria talks about that happening at one point, that she feels like her tongue has been cut out. So then, what I call a miracle happened. I went to the Mexico Fine Arts Center for a literary festival. I was invited as one of the poets to read. And on the night that I wasn't reading, Sandra Cisneros was reading from Woman Hollering Creek. And I was listening, the auditorium was dark, and suddenly I heard a very quiet but clear voice. And it said, his nation chewed him up and spat him out like piñón shell. And when he emerged from an airplane one late afternoon, I knew I would one day make love with him. And I just felt this sense of bliss. I can't explain it. And then I started to talk myself out of it. I said, no, this is not a poem, a line of a poem that I just heard. This is something that wants to belong to a much longer story. And I said, Demetria, you are out of your mind. Go to bed tonight. You'll wake up tomorrow morning. You'll be back to your senses, and get on with your poetry. So the next morning in the hotel, I woke up and I felt that sense of elation. It was like a quickening. And I pulled out the hotel stationery and wrote that first line. And I continued to write after work for, I don't know how many months it was, I don't know, 8, 9, 10. And I felt like the book was dictated to me. I felt like I was just hearing a voice that was giving me the words, which was a good thing because I had never taken a workshop on how to write a novel. And so I didn't know what I was doing, and if I had known, I would have talked myself out of doing it. But the other feeling was that the story pre-existed. It was already there, out there in the universe somewhere, and that all I needed to do was take it down. And if I didn't take it down, somebody else would take it down, which would be a pity considering all I had gone through in my trial. So that's kind of the story of how the novel began.
And about the sanctuary movement and then the charge. Tell us a little bit about that, how you came to the sanctuary movement.
The sanctuary movement was really big. It was a mostly faith-based movement. And you had American citizens, North Americans, aiding Central American refugees clandestinely. They were helping them into the United States. These people were fleeing brutal US-backed dictatorships. So that was the context. People felt they could not look away and that they had to help. Many churches were declaring themselves sanctuaries. So it was a big religion story, and I was the religion writer for the Albuquerque Journal, and I was also freelancing for the National Catholic Reporter. I had interviewed some refugees, but I'd never had the experience of watching them brought over from Mexico into the United States, crossing the border illegally. So in 1986, I took a trip with a Lutheran minister and 2 other men. We went from Albuquerque to Juarez. There they met 2 Salvadoran women refugees who were pregnant. And we brought them back into the United States from Juarez. From there we drove Juarez to Albuquerque. And that was the end of the trip. So I thought, I had my reporter's notebook, I was taking notes. I hoped that this might be a story, or at least research for a future story on the sanctuary movement. That was 86 that we took the trip. In 87, the phone rang. I was at the newsroom putting finishing touches on a story, and the phone caller, the caller informed me that I had been indicted by the United States government in connection with conspiring to bring refugees into the country, illegal aliens, and actually helping in their transport and encouraging them to come. I faced a potential 25 years in prison. The Lutheran minister was charged similar charges as well. So that was 87, and in 88, we went to trial. Ultimately, I was found not guilty on First Amendment grounds. Let me backtrack. The prosecution said that I had gone along not as a reporter, not with that reporter's notebook, but as an activist who actually had conceived of and carried out the crime, the so-called crime of smuggling these illegal aliens. And so our argument was no, she had a reporter's notebook, she took her notes, she did exactly what a reporter should do. The jury agreed, and in a very short while, I found out later in a few minutes, they acquitted me on First Amendment grounds. She acted as a reporter, therefore she's protected freedom of the press. The Lutheran pastor was also acquitted for very interesting reasons historically. In 86, the year that we took the trip, then Governor Tony Anaya had declared New Mexico a sanctuary state for Central American refugees who were fleeing their dictatorships. And so Glenn, the minister, had that proclamation to back him up. So he was acquitted as well. So that essentially is the story of the trial.
Could I ask you to read some poetry?
Sure.
Okay. Here's the Nativity for 2 Salvadoran women.
long time. Nativity for Two Salvadoran Women, 1986-1987. Your eyes, large as Canada, welcome this stranger. We meet in a Juarez train station where you sat hours, your offspring blooming in you like cactus fruit, dresses stained where breasts leak, panties and purses tagged Hecho en El Salvador, your belts like equators, mark north from south, borders I cannot cross, for I am a North American reporter. Pen and notebook, the tools of my tribe, distance us, though in any other era I might press a stethoscope to your wombs, hear the symphony of the unborn, finger forth infants to light, wipe afterbirth, cut cords. You tell me it is impossible to raise a child in that country. Sisters, I am no saint, just a woman who happens to be a reporter who happens to be a woman, squat in a forest, peeing on pine needles, watching you vomit morning sickness, a sickness infinite as the war in El Salvador, a sickness my pen and notebook will not ease. Tell me, ¿por qué están aquí? How did you cross over? In my country, we sing of a baby in a manger, finance death squads, how to write of this shame, of the children you chose to save. It is impossible to raise a child in that country. A North American reporter, I smile. You tell me you are due in December. We nod, knowing what women know. I shut my notebook, watch your car rock through the Gila. A canoe hangs over the windshield like the beak of an eagle. Babies turn in your wombs, summoned to Belen to be born.
And here's when I have seen you read. I really enjoyed you. Here we go. And this is the post-trial feelings.
This was actually done during my indictment. Yeah, same feelings during and after, I'll tell you. I was very fortunate because the poet Allen Ginsberg came to do a fundraiser for us, and so I read this prior to him coming onto the stage, and it was inspired by his poem, America. Wanted. America, our marriage is coming apart. I've done everything right, got my degree. Now you tell me my English won't do? America, I'm not good enough for you? Better my Spanglish than your smooth talk, America. No, I won't sleep with you, not now, not ever. Ah, come on, America. All I wanted was a little adobe house and a trisco, a porch swing, 2 niños, some democracy. Now I read in the Albuquerque Journal, you left me for a younger woman. Bought drugs for guns, guns for drugs, destroyed Managua in order to save it, spied on communist Maryknoll nuns in Cleveland. America, your face is on wanted posters in post offices, and I'm on sleeping pills again, America. Last night I dreamed the Pentagon was a great Ouija board spelling out, repent, repent. In half sleep I reached for you, love, but got only a scent of amber waves of grain. I got up for a hit of caffeine, the Book of Psalms, and whoosh, I saw the promised land. You don't need citizenship papers there. It's colored and smells of refried beans. Remember who you are, America. Purple mountain majesty above fruited plains, worked by Mexicanos. America, call off your dogs. America, give me a green card, though I don't qualify. America, forgive me if I gag your memory at La Paloma Bar on South Broadway. America, I'm 27 and tired thanks to you. And thanks to you, I found God on a stoop on Arno Street. America, you claim crimes fierce in this neighborhood. I tell you it's nothing next to your crimes. The wars we fund start at the packaged liquor store and end twice a year at confession. America, I don't want progress. I want redemption. Cut the shit. We could be lovers again. Don't hang up. America, I'm your dark side. Embrace me and be saved. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I know you can. America, I'm not all bitter. I'm a registered Republican. At parties, when friends ask, America, who? I introduce you, explain you've had a difficult upbringing. But I can't cover up for you, America. Get that straight. Honey, it's not too late. It's not too late. America, the ball's in your court now.
Now the class would like to ask you some questions, right? Yeah. Don't be shy.
My life is an open book. Literally.
Yeah.
You know a lot about me having read Mother Tongue. So.
Back there.
Okay, I was really intrigued by all the references to foreign cultures in this book. Like, I think there was a fertility doll from Africa, and Mary studies like Zen philosophy and things like that. And then there's like she covers up the window with a silk cloth that has Arabic writing on it. So I was just interested in what you have to say about including these elements from other.
Yeah, it's interesting that you focused on that because that idea is developed a lot in my next book, Block Captain's Daughter. Maria's a Chicana in modern times. She may still go to church, but she's got an altar, and it expresses her interest in other spiritual traditions. She's got the fertility doll from Africa there, and then as you read on, you see her interest in Eastern philosophies, and again, spiritual traditions. And so it's a globalized world. She knows she has choices. She's a spiritual seeker. She knows she's not bound to the church in the way that her ancestors would have been. In Black Captain's Daughter, Corey does the same thing. She says, I never met a religion I didn't like. And she's got statues of everything and everyone, gods and gurus on her still traditional altar. So I think that, again, kind of expresses the sensibility of modern Chicanas, Latinas, whatever you want to call yourself. We have choices.
Thank you.
Right now you said we have choices. It kind of makes me think in your book, Maria, regardless of her whole experience, she ends up finding her identity in a sort of way through a man. So how is it that she has a choice if she still has to find it through the identity of a man, even if it's not the man that she admires and loves in this book, is still through her son?
I don't see her finding her identity through her son. She's a mother. She adores her son. I mean, what mother isn't? She's proud of it. But I think she finds it increasingly through politics. You know, the work that she does with the PTA on anti-nuclear waste and that kind of thing. That's how I see her finding her identity. I don't think it's because she spends, all her time thinking about her son. She was also very influenced by Soledad, a Mexicana who was interested in remedios. So I don't write about that in the book, but I imagine her, following that path as well. So I don't really see it that way. The final bit of her journey there is getting to El Salvador and trying to find out if the father of her child is living, was disappeared, is dead. And so that answers a piece of this, that helps her answer part of the mystery of this man. But toward the end of the book, she talks about how she's finally becoming herself.
I was just interested, did you ever consider ending the book without Jose Luis's letter? Or how is it that you decided to give him that last voice?
That's a good question. And the book has been translated into a number of languages, but the Italians said they didn't want it because the ending was too happy. And my response is, listen, too many Salvadorans have been killed off. I'm not going to kill off another one. And I think the other thing too is maybe subconsciously I wanted to make sure that the book didn't depict Salvadorans or Jose Luis as victims. He was an activist in El Salvador. That's why he had to flee. He's an activist in Albuquerque, getting involved with the work there, translating human rights alerts, etc. And we see it, that final letter, that he remains an activist. So that is, I think, is what happened, conscious or not, with that final letter.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm interested in, if you would please explain why you included Maria being molested as a child. What was the significance of that, and why you chose to include it towards the end of the book rather than when we're first introduced to her as a character?
I think it would have been lousy in terms of structuring the novel to introduce it at the end. I mean, a story by its nature has to kind of build up to a climax. So that was part of it. And I don't know that I knew that until I got toward the end of that story. I did not make an outline, I can tell you that. I know, like I said, I was just dictating. It's hard for me to say I chose to put anything in. But I knew that what was happening in the world at that time, when I was writing this, increasingly women were starting to talk about their experiences of sexual abuse, domestic violence. And that surely was having a big effect on me. But also there was more information coming out about what we now call post-traumatic stress syndrome. And so that's what's happening with him. And so, again, I'm not sure if it's conscious or not, but it seemed logical that their two inner wars would culminate at the same time and collide. And they would both have to come to grips with their need for healing.
The topic of mental illness runs through your work a lot, through a lot of your different works, and I know that it's become a topic as well in popular culture with the actress in the Silver Linings Playbook just winning an Oscar, and she mentioned, I think when she won it, I was watching an interview, and she mentioned something about how it's so taboo to talk about an illness in your mind, whereas we're so open about talking about illnesses in your body. And I wondered if you could comment as to why you chose to include this topic in some of your different...
Well, it chose me, and I write most directly about it in an essay called Birthday in Confessions of a Berlitz-Tape Chicana. I have bipolar disorder. It's like diabetes, never go away, but you manage it. And the right medications, good doctor, and you take really good care of yourself. You go to bed at a good time, you get up at a good time. I mean, it's all the things that we all should do, crazy or not, so to speak. And so I had to write about it because it has been such an important part of my life. I mean, it's been difficult, obviously, but it's also given birth, I think, to experiences that have expanded my own vision, my own understanding of spirituality. So I felt I had to write it, and increasingly I'm really grateful, because every time that I read to an audience that essay, or someone will have read it, someone comes up to me and will tell me, my sister is struggling with that, I've got it, my mother. And so part of the purpose was definitely to remove the stigma for other people.
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. During your trial, what kind of emotions were you feeling in regards to like the American judicial system?
I don't know if I was thinking that deeply or feeling. I was just numb. I mean, I was a little bit crazed. It was only until afterwards that I saw what how intolerable this was. I mean, with everything that's going on that needs to be addressed, for them to try to nab a reporter to basically make a lesson out of her, to send a message to other reporters, you shouldn't be covering the sanctuary movement or similar controversies. I mean, it's just, I was infuriated. And that, I think, was what I let the feelings come out, after the thing was over. Because during the time I just had to be like my attorney told me, you just have to be an ordinary, good citizen, no expressing, outrage at the judicial system but something lovely happened. One of our jurors was a woman named Antoinette, and after the whole thing was over, she came up to me, I think it was at a reading of Mother Tongue, and she told me, she said, I hate to tell this to you because it was at the cost of your suffering, but that trial completely changed my life. She went back to school, she became very political, has worked for all these really awesome nonprofit corporations, and so something wonderful happened there. We stared at these jurors, stone-faced, knowing that our lives, hung in the balance, depending on what they would conclude. Yeah, but I think it was hard to feel anything during the trial, during the period of the indictment and the trial.
Did it make you want to become more politically active?
Yeah, it did. It did, and I pause only because I think that's so much a part of my makeup that it would have happened anyway. But that certainly had a huge effect. I mean, I was marked forever as a political activist, and that's how people saw me, and as a leftist, as a progressive. So, I had some capital. So I decided to use it. And I'm still an activist. I mean, I love it. What I'm doing now is I'm part of Los Jardines Institute, and we're a community garden. We're in a poor area, and our focus is food justice. We also have an environmental racism component. We're involved in policy, public policy. And we have a literacy component. And you remember the books that were banned in Tucson? Well, we started an underground library. We have it in a studio that's on our property with the farm. And we're 26 books short of what we need to have all the books that were banned. And we have a monthly banned book club, which is just fantastic. We just read 500 Years of Chicano History. We read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and we're planning to do a tour of New Mexico colleges to talk about the banned books. And one of our representatives actually presented a memorial in which he says he names each of the banned books, he says what they're about, he focuses on the top 7 that were boxed up and taken away that first day. And he goes on and he said, literally, he says, whereas New Mexico is not Arizona. And then he goes on to say, you know, I believe, or we propose that every New Mexican read these books, especially young people, for our intellectual uplift, so that we can better create and contribute, you know, to this project. That's my word, called America. So he was really brave to do that, and my fear is that next legislative session, our Governor Martinez is going to do something to try to get those books banned in New Mexico.
Back there. Professora.
Thank you again for coming. I know that you've been to many, many schools and organizations talking about this novel specifically. What's one of the more surprising or memorable comments or questions that you've gotten from your audience?
Wow, let me think about that for a second. I guess the question that isn't surprising, but is memorable because it happens all the time, is she you? And I always take the 5th.
I just had a question in terms of your activism as a journalist and the history that has followed you through your activism and your journalism. Are you at all involved in any of the activism happening with Mexican journalists who are being persecuted and killed in Mexico specifically because they are exposing the narcotraficantes and the corruption within the government? I don't know if there's any kind of like coalition building with New Mexico journalists and Mexican journalists to sort of bring these issues to light.
I haven't been involved in that specific issue, but close issue is the narcotraficantes, the U.S. war against drugs, and Javier Sicilia. I don't know if you remember the caravan that came through the United States on its way to Washington. Well, it came through Albuquerque, and I was on a committee that helped organize it. There were over 100 Mexicanos and a lot of U.S. citizens who were part of that caravan, and they came to give their testimonies. Javier Sicilia was there too. The people got up to give their testimonies about how the drug war had shattered their lives. And I'll never in my life forget this one image. A woman got up and she was talking about what had happened to her daughter, and she just started falling apart. And one of our curanderas from Albuquerque came up behind her, and she had what looked like a chalice of copal, and she was just going round and round with it, smudging her. So just to bless her and to give her the strength to continue her story.
I was wondering if you could just tell us about the title of Mother Tongue, where that came from.
Yeah, one day I was doing some coverage of Guatemalans, a community living, was it near Phoenix, going toward Phoenix? They were farmers and refugees. Somehow I learned, not from one of them, but somehow I learned that one of the things that Guatemalans had gone through, I know this was true for the U.S., for Salvador, someone described seeing somebody's tongue cut out and then like pinned to his shirt as a way to terrorize the community, as a way of saying, don't speak out. Don't speak out against the dictatorship. And so that image lingered, and that's how it became the title. And also there's the issue of Maria and her silence about what happened to her and her finding her voice. and that coming forth.
I guess one more question. When John Rechi was here, I asked him if he had a favorite of his works, and Professor Calderón said you can't ask a writer that because they're all like children and you can't pick a favorite, and he said no, he couldn't. But I wondered if there was one of your works that you felt was particularly close to your heart, and why?
Right now, it's my newest novel, Block Captain's Daughter, because I think one of the characters named Corey so reflects my own quest for my Chicana identity that I really enjoy what she has discovered on the way. And also we have a Mexicana, an immigrant who almost died crossing on foot over the border. We have a Salvadoran. She's gonna have a child by a Salvadoran man who is also a political refugee, who's now living in Albuquerque. We have a Cubana Jew who's partners with Maritza, a Chicana. And we have Peter, a transplant to New Mexico, an Anglo. And they're this little community of activists, of friends. And so I'm enjoying them a lot, because again, you don't know what you've written until you read it. You don't know what you were so obsessed with until you finally read it and start to make connections.
Yes.
I was wondering if you would consider this novel, Mother Tongue, a Chicana novel.
Yeah, a Chicana novel, and let's put it this way, a Chicana living on the borderlands. Because she's a Chicana, she lives in New Mexico, and there are refugees fleeing. She has to kind of come to grips with the fact that she's a citizen of the world, as it were. You know, she's now colliding with the world of Central America, with the world of El Salvador. And so it's more than just a book about her Chicano identity. And in one section, she talks about this episode where Jose Luis becomes very angry with her, saying, you know, what do you know about suffering? And she reflects that she wonders, you know, what does he see when he sees me? You know, I may be a Chicana, but I'm also a U.S. citizen paying tax dollars that, you know, are being sent to death squads in his country. Does he see me as a sphinx, a beast, half white, half Chicana, half Yankee, North American, and the other half Chicana? So she wonders sometimes, you know, how he perceives her. So I would say it's beyond a Chicano novel.
In that way, that quote, I also brought it up in the last discussion because I wasn't sure, I mean, besides that interpretation that you gave right now, is there any sort of critique as to the American way of being, like how we think like we can save everyone else, or I don't know, just how we can maybe be oblivious to what's going on around us?
Mm-hmm.
Is that also like a critique, or is anything else to it?
You mean throughout the book?
Well, yeah, that quote and yeah, throughout the book.
What's that?
The quote that you were mentioning right now, where he says he doesn't know how to see her. She's like a murderess and a whore.
Right. And the question again?
If that quote, or just throughout the book, if it's a critique of just the American way of being in relation to what's going around the surrounding area.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole book is really a critique the whole book's a lot of things, but it's also a critique of U.S. policy and this idea that somehow the U.S. can spread democracy when it doesn't even know what battles it's fighting. You know, we were involved in El Salvador and Guatemala and Nicaragua in the name of fighting communism. And so there's this idea that Americans have about their so-called destiny in the world. And at the same time, we know nothing about other cultures, nothing about what's really going on.
Yes, sir.
Would you consider mother tongue a testimonial narrative?
How do you define that?
I would define testimonio as politicized, autobiographical, or biographical writing.
Yeah, again, I didn't really intend it that way. I just wanted to write a good love story set during a particular period, but absolutely, that's what comes out, and I'm really proud of that.
I have a question. San Leslie, your friends, or you tell her about what happened when you heard her and then gave you the first line? You thought about the first line of mother tongue?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I told her it's been a long time, but I think I was so shy I just kind of like mentioned it in passing, but I think I need to write her a letter now and say, you know, I owe you one.